This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'm the fellow who has a hyphen in my name. The hyphen is silent, but I am anything but that. Well, we have another cosmopolitan morning. Cosmopolitan means that it's a time for everybody in their own time. It happens to be our morning. So I will say without further ado, good morning, Sarah.
Good morning, Jeremy. Good morning, everyone.
And good morning, everybody. This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley, the voice of Respectonomics, with my co-host, Sarah Bentham. And we're going to be doing something today that is part of a Compass Point series. And it's called what we're calling this one is Existence and Food. Now, because this is part of a series, everybody's going to have to put up with one little introduction, which will be borderline repetitive. I'm not sure what else I can do. But here it goes. That when we started on Respectonomics, we recognized that there were three constituents that would always be part of the human fabric. That is the body and the mind. The mind is what you're looking at and listening to at the moment. Can you hear it rattling?
A little bit.
A little bit. Well, here it is. The
Mine
body
has bells on it.
Okay, you have bells and I have marbles, but we have a body and a mind, and we have a soul, and you and I have kicked around, you call it a soul, a spirit, or an inner being. But the point of the matter is this, that life involves certain essentials. So we're dividing life into two categories, existence and living. Somebody said to me, well, there's existing and thriving, which I think is a very fair distinction as well. But we're focusing on the business of existing at the moment. There are 6 categories to existing, and the one we're going to be talking about this morning is food.
Yes.
Because food is one of the primary constituents for the ability for us to live. And what I'd like to explore with you, Sarah, is the concept of food, how it nourishes the body, how it nourishes the mind, and how it nourishes the soul. And before we go any further, I can hear the corporate, what would you call it, the corporate overhang saying something like, well, we get feeding the body and the mind, but the soul doesn't really belong to us. And we need to come back to one essential theme, and that is that the human being is made up of these 3 parts. We are tripartite. We are 3 parts. And the problem is when we exclude one, it's a bit like a rainbow. If you take out one, the whole thing collapses. We need all 3 to be congruent. We need them to be in balance with one another, and they need to be able to work together effectively and actually seamlessly.
And I was going to say, if we could encourage corporations or businesses to maybe, if soul is not the right word for you, you can swap out, exchange that word for something else. You say those 3 parts are foundational. So, do a word swap in terms of association.
It's interesting, even when you say a word swap, most corporations would be very proud to say something like the soul of our organization is. Predictably what they say is the soul of the organization is our people. But what I'm getting at here is these are words that don't need to be alarming or frightening. We're saying let's embrace them. That when the 3 are constituently gathered together, they are congruent. That is when we find that the very finest potential of a human being is realized. That's when we find that we get the innovation, we get the ideas, we get the collaboration. In fact, we get everything that, frankly, gives you one word, is prosperous. It gives us good hope. So on the subject of food, I want to, first of all, point out one thing, and that is most of us are very good at re-eating. We happen to know that we do it in the morning, we do it in the afternoon, and we do it in midnight sometimes. Is there ever a midnight snack in your household by any chance whatsoever?
Quite possibly.
Possibly a chocolate bar? I mean, I don't know. But we do re-eat. And when we look at the body, which is where we're going to start, and we're going to look at food specifically, but when we look at food as a necessity for living, there are a few things about food that come to the table come to the table every time. And the first one is that it's a way of dignifying the human being. If we deprive the body of food, we deprive the body of its ability to exist. And that
Right.
has an internal compass, which is the one that says we need to feed the body. But it is also fair to say that from a moral point of view, if nowhere else, but we also need to recognize that if we're denying food to some other segment of the population, we are responsible for that as well.
Yes.
Can't just look at our own pantry and say, I'm okay. Our pantry needs to be one that reaches to let's just say, to the world.
Right.
I think that's a fairly straightforward moral commitment. When we think of respectonomics, we think of regaining, restoring, restating the dignity of the human being. So what I've
Right.
just said about, the ubiquity of food, getting it around to everybody, I think that falls right into the lap of respectonomics.
Agreed.
Okay. So the next thing we need to think about, though, beyond what you might call the immediate necessities of food, is I'm not a dietitian. As a matter of fact, I heard you say something yesterday which absolutely horrified me. Did you not say that you had, yeah, it was awful. You said you had a high protein breakfast or something, didn't you?
Oh, that horrified you. Yes, I did.
Yes. Well, it horrified me because I want to know what happened to bacon and eggs. I want to know what happened to fat. I want
That
to,
is protein.
it is?
Eggs are protein. Eggs are an excellent source of protein.
Well, then I'm healthy.
Protein, but a lot of fat with it. However,
Yeah, and the fat is good. I happen to know that
yeah,
because it tastes
depending on
good.
the type of fat.
Because it tastes good.
Yeah, okay, yes.
Yeah. And sugar is good for you. No, actually, better than sugar. Maple syrup is good for you. I know that.
It's natural. It's
If you
nat
know, hmm?
it's natural sugars if it comes right out of the tree.
Absolutely. I feel safe. Anyway, in the meantime, we think of repetitive eating. We think of balanced eating, all seriousness. You think of your proteins and carbohydrates and fats and sugars and glucose and all those things. They all
Right.
need to be in balance to one degree or another. We space them out. We don't engage in feeding 24/7. I mean, we joke about having a midnight snack, but the truth
Right.
of the matter is we do not have midnight snacks 24/7.
Right.
Then we think about digestion. And if you think about food, we've all done that awful, gosh, it looks good. We've taken too much, and there's a digestion problem to follow. So
Yeah.
we understand that. We understand that there's a preference issue. You will prefer avocados, I will prefer zucchini, whatever the differences are. But we do have preferences. And that, again, I think is a very important insight into respectonomics because we say that we need to honor other people's freedom of choice. So, in other words, the food is a matter of preference as well as a matter of necessity. Then we talk about the nutritional value. You've hit on that with your protein discussion. We talk about texture. If you think of it, food has different texture. You've had that time when something has been overcooked or undercooked, and you've had that feeling that the texture doesn't feel very nice,
Yes.
and you wish something had been done to change that. And you may wonder, sorry, it was the last thing I was going to say, the optics. You kind of want it to look nice when you have, people in for a meal. You spend time on the
Like
optical.
it's visually appealing for sure.
Absolutely. So you think of that as well. Then, of course, there's the cultural issue that what works in your culture is different possibly from mine and vice versa. And anybody we talk to has different cultural
Yeah.
upbringings.
Like
You may not know this, but our producer has a South African background and
yeah.
brings some amazing dietary issues to the table and foods that
Mm,
deal with spices like coriander and stuff like that. But anyway, and the last thing we need to think about in food is we talked a little about our moral commitment to let's say to humanity, but there's also another commitment that we have to make, which of course is to the climate. And it's
yeah.
very easy to think that I can get fresh food 24/7, right the way through the year. If I want asparagus in December, I'll get it. But in fact, we are putting tremendous demands on the climate.
I think we
I,
take it for granted.
yeah.
And it's readily when it's readily available, I think we can often take it for granted.
Well, I want to talk about that. The readily available part is introducing an element here. And you may wonder, why are we talking about food for the body in this kind of, what should we call it, detail? And there's a reason for it, because I've tested this out and talked to quite a few people with one line question, which is, your recollection of food 25 years ago, is it different from today? And the answer has been universally, yep. The food then tasted like whatever it was meant to taste like. So whether it was eggs or chicken or tomatoes, whatever it would be, they tasted like they should have done 25 years ago. Today they do not. And part of, relatively speaking, and
Right.
part of that, I think, is that complacency that you talked about. It's there, I'll take it. So go back a line, and that is that the producer, the farmer, the distributor, the grocery store, anybody who's involved in that distribution is looking to bring food to the table where it can handle longevity on the shelf and also can handle the trucking and the trailering and the flying and all those things. So what's
The
that?
thing that we see as enhancements or developments sometimes can actually take away from, right?
Exactly. And I think there's an important parallel here, because you and I know we can get information at a click of the fingers of
Yes.
any kind, any shape we want. We can get all that information. It travels enormous distances. Last night I was on the phone to Australia on Wi-Fi, FaceTime, whatever it's called. But what I'm getting at is we can get things so easily now, and information is just one of them. And there are two problems. One is that information has become increasingly less credible. Most people say today they don't know, whether the news is right or not. By the
We don't
same token, I don't think most of us know where half our food comes from, where it was made, whose hands were in it. The farmer of old, you would know because he was out there digging out the carrots and bringing them to the table that same minute.
we're not confident of the source.
Exactly. So we've got that to deal with. But here's something else. If we would agree that the food today tastes increasingly, I'll use one word, sterile, synthetic, tasteless, I mean, whatever word you want to use to describe the sort of the modern way it gets to the table, doesn't that remind you of the way information is getting to us? How sterile it feels and how unimaginative it is, and it just seems to be pumped out and pumped out and pumped out, and it's right there in front of us. And I
And just so much of it.
and so much of it. And I think this is an insight into the reality of artificial intelligence, that artificial intelligence is very good, volumetrically speaking, bringing us all the information we need at a drop of a hat. It's great. But the human being can't do that. The human being, when he or she passes information along, it is through the concept or through the channels of the mind and the soul, or the mind and the spirit. And the point of the matter is, our information one to another is far more subtle, has a far greater taste, has a far greater value than just relying on the proverbial Google or AI or whatever it is. I think we
Right.
need to be aware of the risks of information being in volume as against being in that subtle quality that we can have as a human being, one to another.
Mm.
Is that fair?
Yes. There's just gonna throw something out there, talking about how AI, for example, can sort of funnel, for lack
Mhm.
of better word, draw on a multitude of
Right,
narrative platforms or information
right.
sources in order to funnel that down in order to provide it to you. You're relying on where it's gathering. I think there can be some opportunity there, or something to think about as well in terms of when human beings are sharing, where is that funnel of information coming from? And what are we choosing to
Ah,
share? Which could be a completely separate topic, but it was just a thought as
no,
you're
it's exactly the same one, Sarah.
I'm like,
I'm absolutely in your camp that the AI deals, let's just agree with that sort of volume of information, and we'll assume it's accurate just for the moment.
yes.
But the fact of the matter is that two human beings can interact with a much greater sense of credibility and confidence and trust when in fact we remove from ourselves literally the body and the mind and allow one soul to interact with the other soul. Now, that may sound like we've suddenly gone into a yoga class or something, but the truth of the matter is that the more we understand the other human being, which I believe is not only a mental and a bodily exercise, it's also one of allowing one soul to speak to the other.
Mm.
I mean, we're trilingual, if you will. We've got the body that speaks to the body, we've got the mind that speaks to the mind, just like you and I are now. But when we allow the soul to speak to another soul, I think what we do is we've upgraded. No, I shouldn't even say upgraded. I think we've now come back.
Connected?
Hmm?
Connect Is it
We've
connected?
connected the way we were actually intended to be. And again, anyone, the corporate executive listening to this might think we've gone into a land of a yoga bill or something. Actually, the truth of the matter is, the more I understand you as an individual, the more I understand you as an employee, you as a supplier, you as a shareholder, you as a supervisor, whatever the, let's just say, different functional roles are, then in fact we remove that sort of hierarchy that comes out of so many of these arrangements and allows us to be one to one. And if
Maybe
we are, sorry,
the sole word that we use, that we understand why we're imparting that in corporate world, again, it's a semantics thing with them. Maybe it's core, right?
I think it's absolutely core. I mean, my favorite example is the old. You've
The
heard,
center.
I know we're repeating from previous episodes, but here it is. You go and buy a bicycle, and a really upscale one. And as you're leaving the store, the salesperson yells, "By the way, you only get two-thirds of the chain."
Right,
That's not a good idea. The bicycle will go nowhere, and it's exhausting, and it will fall over. I mean, I can't think of any redeeming quality in it. Not to mention how many hands get messed up trying to put a chain back on again.
right, right.
Have you ever tried doing it?
I have.
Yes, and it's not a pleasant picture.
It can be a little messy.
Yeah, exactly. So all we're talking about here is the coming to the grips with this extraordinary identity, the unique values of a human being, and allowing them to correspond, to be congruent one with another.
Yes.
Now, so far, so good. But when we look at this, what we used to call the grid, it's now called the living compass. And the living compass is what it's designed to do is it talks about the body, the mind, and the soul, and talks about the necessities for existence, and then goes into the ones that allow us to thrive. That's fine. But we need to look at each one of these categories of body, mind, and soul. And in this case, we're talking about food.
Yes.
Now, before we go any further, the whole principle behind respectonomics is to provide this dignity. We've talked about that many a time. But there's no greater dignity we can have, the one that we have of ourselves.
Mm.
I do not know how you dignify another human being if you do not have dignity of self. If you don't have that sense of the majesty, the miracles of the human being, I don't know how you reflect that to another person. If you do, I think it runs the risk of being either insincere or artificial, synthetic, I think. So what I want to share now is this, though. Before any of us get into the yings and the yangs of developing relationships with other people and them with us, is fundamental. I absolutely agree with that. But you know, the relationship that's more important than that, Sarah, is the one we have with ourselves. And that is where I think the starting gate for this food formula, this food metaphor, starts taking real traction. That is when we look at what is the food that Jeremy needs for his body? Fine. What is the food that Jeremy needs for his mind? What is the food that Jeremy needs for his soul? Because when I actually examine those, we went through the sort of the cycle of food. But you apply that to your mind, for example. What is it that I need in my mind in order to be successful, proficient, to be useful, collaborative? I mean, all the big words you ever think of. What are the food lines, the foods that I need to do that? So if it's true that I can look at the bodily food, I think I can look at the mental food. It'll be different for everybody.
Absolutely.
You might get off
Really,
you
somebody
might get off reading Charles Dickens, for heaven's sake. But seriously, how the mind gets excited and how it works and everything is extraordinarily personal. I don't mean confidential. I just mean it's very individualistic.
very individualistic.
Yeah. So we can do that. And then again, applying the same principles to the soul. What is it that feeds the soul? I think that one of the greatest ways to feed the soul is allowing the soul to feed another soul. It's
Mm,
it's accretive, it's self-perpetuating, it grows. It's a wonderful experience just by doing that. Now, we've said the sort of what I call the me to me. So Jeremy's looked at Jeremy, Sarah's looked at Sarah, and so on from these points of view. But all of us are in relationships in one degree or another. Some might be business, some might be personal, some might be marital, some might be service clubs, but we're all engaged in relationships with another entity. And I'm not sort of neutralizing the human being when I say that, but entity in the sense of whether it's a living being or an entity in the literal sense. That's where our relationships are. So when we have a relationship with, let's say, my business,
mhm.
I think there are two parts that come to this. First of all, we've explored how does Jeremy, I keep saying Jeremy, but how does anybody look after themselves? We've dealt with that. But now I can also look at this from the standpoint, so then what do I want from the organization? What do I want them to do? How does the corporation, for example, feed my body and my mind and my soul? What steps are they taking? We're talking wages when it comes to body. That's an easy one-liner. But we can talk about shelter. We can talk about safety. Where the mind is concerned, the corporation is going to give me education. It's going to give me new ideas. It's going to give me the opportunities of promotion. It's going to feed my mind. And feeding my soul, a corporation can do that very easily. It's called connecting, engaging, and thanking. I I can't tell you how many times in my corporate life I found that I was neither thanked nor acknowledged.
Right.
That's not a brutal statement. It is a statement of validity, but it's also a statement that says, you know what? How much better the enjoyment of working would have been a straightforward thank you, an unsolicited phone call that says, hey, how are you and your family doing?
Right. Acknowledgement.
Acknowledgement. So when I think the corporation pays attention to me, not just in terms of body and mind, earnings and positions and marketing and all that stuff, but actually takes awareness of me as a human being, I will function at a much higher level. And I'll be a much happier employee or supervisor, and I will bring a lot of smiles to the table as well.
Right.
What could be a better way of growing your business?
Boiled down as simply as engagement.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, there's one other catch to all of this, Sarah, and that is we've talked about me to me, we've talked about the corporation to me, but there's also a responsibility of me to the entity. What am
Absolutely.
I doing for that entity to build up? And it might be a marriage, it might be a service club, it might be my employer, whatever that entity is. What am I doing to build, to engage their body, their mind, and their soul? Very personal. I'm not making grand pontifical statements, merely pointing out the awareness of what we do for others is extraordinarily important. If food to the body is important, food to the mind, food to the soul is important, then it also needs to be reciprocal, not only within ourselves, reciprocal, but also reciprocal in the sense of I'll do it for you and you do it for me.
Absolutely.
Now, I have one concluding comment.
Yes, Jeremy.
If you look at the final compass point document, which we are reproducing at the moment,
Yep.
that's really as a sideline. More important at the moment is to understand, to come to grips with the issues we're talking about. This doesn't need charts, pictures, pictograms. This is something in your own heart and mind that you can grasp or not as you wish. But there is one thing that I've come aware of in life, and that is through all of the relationships we have, and all the food that I've ever taken and all the food that's ever gone through my life and so on. There's one word that still comes to the table, that is mysterious and unexplainable quite often, and that is a miracle. We have miracles in our lives. We are miraculously lifted from a situation. We miraculously help somebody without realizing we've done it. How many times have you heard that statement? You helped me out 25 years ago, and you blink and you say, what are you talking about? That person, that was a miracle. And I'm
Mhm.
only putting miracles on the table because for all of the logistical discussions and the logic and the algorithms and all those things we talk about, there's always miracles.
Mhm.
So I would like to leave us at this point to say, let's all feed very well bodies, minds, and souls for ourselves and other people. And let's also be aware of the great miracle, the greatest miracle of which is the human being.
Thank you, Jeremy, and
And I rest my case.
thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Sarah.